Hi Farhad.
Hi Aditya, welcome
Welcome.
here.
Yeah, welcome back to Sudeep Audio's channel.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to be here at your private mix and mastering studio in Pali Hill,
Thank you.
and it's a wonderful job done by one of the world's leading studio designers, Andy Munro.
Yes,
I believe this would be his smallest room ever.
quite possibly. I don't think so. Unless maybe you count some cubicles in a BBC facility or something, you never know.
Okay.
But yeah, I think so.
Yeah. How does it feel? I mean, how was this process? And
Uh, well, I always wanted my own little workspace, my own space where I could work without, budgetary constraints, work without time constraints, work at my own pace. And I remember, I think we required some speakers at Famous for a new room we were building. And I had a very long conversation with Andy on the phone. And we were talking about speakers and the ability to use certain speakers for certain sized rooms. And we were discussing something, and we got into a huge discussion of satellite and sub versus having composite speakers, which both he and I like. Both of us like the idea of bass coming from the speaker and not a subwoofer. And I just idly mentioned to him at that point that at some point I want to build my own little room, and will you do it for me? And he said, sure, you let me know, there's no problem. And so when we got this place, I again asked, and Kapil, of course, jumped in very enthusiastically. It took one thing to another. Well, it started off as a very, very simple idea. I actually didn't think I could do this. So I just asked for their help in, maybe some Prima acoustic room kit or something like that. And just went on evolving, and it's now, you can see, become a full-blown Andy Munro room.
great. You've been collecting and investing in equipment for years now.
Well, yeah, it feels like that.
Yeah, so we'll cover that in a second part of this, studio tour kind of thing. But how did this whole construction process happen? How long did it take? What were the hiccups?
Well, it it was actually surprisingly smooth to build a studio. Um, when I built Galactica A at Famous, which is Andy's first room in India, we didn't have access to almost anything that was specified. We didn't have access to Rivac rubber sheets, we didn't have access to wooden flooring, we didn't have access to acoustic foam, and we had to literally scrounge stuff from the industry and send samples to Andy to make it work. Like, for example, there was a vinyl barrier, a noise barrier called Rivac, which had the government wanted to charge us 600 or 450% duty to import it. It's a very heavy material, and it was just financially impossible to import it. So ultimately, to replace that, we had to use our old Fiat car rubber dicky matting glued onto plywood, 3 mm plywood, which sort of replicates the same properties.
This was at Galactica.
This was at Galactica, and this time round they specified door cores and fireproof door cores and seals and door seals and this material and that material, and I was like, how on earth are we going to get all this stuff? And everything's available here. I mean, that was actually the most fun part of building it, because we built it with zero compromise. I mean, it might be like a private home studio sort of thing, but it's built to a very exacting standard. The floor is floating. The door seals came from the UK. The door cores are fireproof door cores from somewhere else in Europe. The ceiling tiles came from Denmark. And it was, the foam came from somewhere else. The glass wool was specified to some specific density which came from, and it was all available here. You could just make a phone call and somebody would say yes, we have it, and deliver it. And so we bit by bit by bit built it, and I had a lot of fun, and I can say proudly there's no compromise in the materials used to make this uh, room.
Okay. Your labor of love is very evident, apparent when we'll do this detailed studio tour of yours.
Thank
What exactly do you want to achieve by, by making this room, and what is the purpose of doing this?
Well, I think important thing to first tell you is what this room is not. This room is not a recording studio.
So there's no dubbing booth, and
There is no
everything.
dubbing booth. I have a lot of mics in my personal collection, but there's not a single mic preamp in this room either. For various reasons. I always wanted a little space of my own to do work in. And as you know, I already have a fantastic large space to do my work in, which even today, I think after 19 years, I would arguably say is still the best sounding studio in this city, if not this country.
That's famous.
That's Galactica A at Famous. That's my first baby. I think more love and attention has been showered building that room than anything I've ever done in my life, and I am very proud of it. And so that is what a recording studio is. That's what a recording studio should be. It's uncompromised in its gear, it's uncompromised in its design, it's uncompromised in its sound, it's uncompromised in its size, which in this city where rooms are now becoming toilet size literally is a very great luxury to have. So this is not a recording studio. It is not a complete solution. It can't offer you everything that a recording studio can. And that's the most single important differentiation. This is my other baby, but it's different from my first baby. You see, I had a lot of conflicts in some projects working at Galactica A. We are now arguably locationally challenged, shall we say. Possibly, I think the furthest studio complex south. And what ends up happening is I get a lot of inquiries for doing work, for mixing. And the first thing they ask me is, where do you work? And I say, I'm based out of Famous. That's the only place I work in. And
You're not a freelance.
no, I
Right.
don't. I don't freelance. That's a self-imposed thing. I don't go to other studios and work. So, I can't go to other studios and work. Everything else I could go to would seem a bit like a compromise versus my room. Either in terms of gear, mics, acoustics, whatever you want to name, I feel it's compromised. So what happens is either there's a location constraint or there's a budget constraint. Sometimes someone wants to work with me specifically, but they can't afford the studio. Sometimes someone wants to work with me specifically and they can afford the studio, but they're just too busy to come from Andheri or beyond Andheri to Famous to do work on a daily basis, like maybe for a 10-day project or 5-day project or whatever. And that starts becoming a huge disadvantage for me to do the kind of work I want to do. It breaks my heart sometimes when a young band calls me up and says, hey, we heard of you, we'd love to work with you. We heard from other people, we have enough budget to work with you, but what's your studio rate? I tell them there's like an icy silence on the phone. And I feel really bad because there's a small voice that says, but that's not the budget for our entire album and its promotion. And my heart breaks because I think some of the new bands that are there today are supremely talented. I'd love to work with them. I'd I mean, if they want to work with me, I'd love to give them the benefit of my working with them and bringing to the table what they think I can. And it's just simply not possible at Galactica. Projects like these are simply not possible. So I wanted to empower this happening. I wanted to work with younger bands. I wanted to work with musicians and mix for people who would not come either for budgetary purposes or for locational disadvantages that we face. You know, so that's why this.
Okay. You've been working with Galactica Famous Studios for almost 2 decades now.
Yes,
So
it's a long time.
yeah, and it's apparent that your name is synonymous with the studio and vice versa.
Thank you.
So how do you manage or plan to manage work between Famous as well as your private facility?
Uh, well, firstly, I thank you for calling this humble little room a facility, but it's nowhere near. Uh, like I said before, Galactica A is my first love. It's my first baby, and Famous and I have been together for, like you rightly said, nearly 20 years. That's longer than I've been married. It's the longest relationship and possibly among the most important relationships in my life. Uh, it's not something that I would compromise on. Famous is my job, it's my life, and I will continue to be wholeheartedly part of Famous now and in the future.
So there's not going to be any conflict.
There's no conflict of interest there. This is my toy room, that is my serious work room.
Engineers in India don't make a lot of money.
Arguably.
Yeah, okay.
Well, when you compare to maybe music directors and editors and other
Correct.
people associated with a project,
Yes.
possibly.
So how did you plan on your budgets, on your investments? What is the path you took?
It sounds extremely silly seeing what is here, but I had no intention of getting to where this has grown. It's become an all-consuming monster that went completely out of control, and I'm very, very, very grateful to my family, especially to my wife, who let me pander to every whim and fantasy I had for gear in the last 24 years. This room represents the core of everything I always wanted to own but would never have dared ask someone to buy for me. So, yeah, but it started out very, very simply. I said, okay, I mix. It's probably quite well known that I mix in the box. So, though that's not my roots, I mix in the box. So, it started out. We had a problem at Famous. At one point, we had 6 studios, and every time I wanted a new plugin or something, any purchase had to be justified by, oh, but what will the other 5 studios do? So we'll have to buy 5. So if I wanted 5 new plugins costing $1,000, I'd ask for it, and it would be like, okay, but then what about the other studios? We need to have it for them. And suddenly your request for $1,000 worth of plugins becomes a $6,000 request. And I realized very quickly that it was not a reasonable thing to ask the management. I mean, as an engineer, you'd want everything, but as a businessman, you have to see it from their point of view that, hello, maybe you want it, but to be fair to everyone, we'll have to buy it for everyone. Why should you be the only special guy in the facility? So, to circumvent that, actually, one of my friends once had told me this in a mail. We were arguing about something, and he had told me that if I don't invest in myself, why should anyone else?
Okay.
And it struck me as a very trite statement then, but actually, I think I have now, since that point when I thought about it, come to live my life by that. That it's done true. If you are not willing to invest in yourself, in whatever, for your work, for your art, whatever it might be, whether you're a guitar player, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a flute player, if you are not willing to invest in a great instrument or great tools for yourself, how can you expect the world to owe you a living or give you these things? Just by virtue of I deserve it. So I started buying my own plugins for use on my projects in my room, and actually I started a culture among the other engineers also, and encouraged them to start buying their own stuff. And since I bought a lot of plugins from you as well, uh, I have pretty much everything covered,
Right.
and I am pretty much a first day buyer soon as it's released. So I had all these plugins, my investment in myself, and I said, okay, so now if I want to work, I need a computer, I need a 2-channel interface, and I need a damn good set of speakers. So we started out thinking from small speakers to bigger speakers, and I realized that if this was successful at some point, the way speakers were being priced today for a pair of good studio monitors, uh, probably if I ever wanted to work or own my own studio, where if my ambitions ever became larger than just the plugins, computer, and a pair of speakers, uh, I'd need a big pair of speakers. And people often make the mistake when they are building a studio, thinking that your Pro Tools system is going to be really expensive, or your interface, or some mic pre, or your mic, or something that's going to be really expensive. But actually, your monitoring system is the singularly most expensive component in an average studio. I mean, unless you have a Neve or an SSL or something really large, your monitoring system is the singularly most expensive component. In a 30 lakh or 35 lakh rupee outlay of gear, it is at least 30% of that cost in most rooms. And it's very difficult today to outright
Yes.
buy a pair of speakers costing 9 or 10 lakhs. So I started saving up for a large pair of speakers, and uh, I think we bought the first pair of these 8260s for the new room in Famous, and I think the public knows me as a sort of Dyna Audio lover and Genelec hater, but this is the first pair of Genelecs that completely threw me for a six. I just fell madly in love with the sound, and I told Shiv Sood of Sound Team, that I want a pair for myself, and you have to make it happen, however long it takes, however much I have to save and pay for it. And that's I'm glad to say he made it happen. So then I had this big pair of speakers, and then I still find it a little unbelievable when I look at this rack filled with gear that we got to this stage. And I have so many people to thank who went the extra mile for me. All the dealers and manufacturers really pitched in and helped me for it. I'd like to thank them all really. Shiv Sood, you of course, um, Suchita Ahuja at Beatbox for the Antelope stuff, Leslie at Ansata for all my API gear and the Apogee stuff, Dan Zimbelman at API, who made a lot of things possible for me. Michael Deming at Charter Oak, who went out of his way to get that equalizer going. Uh, Darren Fendley at Vintage King for helping me out with the Shadow Hill stuff. Warren Dent at Zen Pro Audio, and so many others. Want to also really thank Kapil, Chris, and Andy, the entire team at Monroe Acoustics, for this fabulous sounding room. I'm overwhelmed by how much you guys put into it, all of you. I thank you so much.